A young widow living in her car got a $7 farmhouse everyone avoided. What she found hidden inside wouldn't just make her rich, it would unravel a truth that had the power to rebuild her entire world. If you've ever felt like you've hit rock bottom, or if you believe in second chances, this story is for you. Stick with me, and if it resonates, maybe think about subscribing, because we tell stories here for people who know what it's like to fight your way back. The frost had spiderwebbed across the inside of the passenger side window, intricate and cruel. I traced one of the lines with a numb finger, watching the delicate architecture melt away from the ghost of my body heat. It was the only warmth in the car. My 2008 Honda Civic wasn't built for Michigan winters, and neither was I. Not anymore. For 3 months, this car had been my home, my closet, my dining room, and my confession. It smelled of stale coffee, grief, and the faint, chemical scent of the gas station air freshener I'd hung from the rearview mirror. A sad little pine tree swaying over the landscape of my failure. On the passenger seat, next to a crumpled fast food bag, lay a flyer I'd plucked from the bulletin board at the library. It was printed on cheap, pale blue paper. Emmett County Homesteading Initiative. A picture of a smiling, cartoonish family stood beside a tidy little house with a puff of smoke coming from the chimney. The reality of the program was buried in the fine print. The county was auctioning off derelict properties, places so far gone they were a net loss on the tax rolls. The starting bid for each was the value of the outstanding lien, which, in some cases, was just a few dollars. It was a last-ditch effort to get people, any people, to put down roots in the forgotten corners of the county. I had exactly $8.41 to my name. 7 of those dollars were tucked into a worn crease in my wallet. A bill I'd been saving for an emergency that was, by any rational measure, already here. The auction was in an hour at the county courthouse. Most of the properties listed were literal ruins, collapsed barns, empty lots choked with weeds. But one stood out. Lot 27, 1440 Black Creek Road. A farmhouse and 5 acres. Lien, $7. $7. It was an absurd, impossible number. A joke. But the cold was seeping into my bones. A deep, invasive cold that felt less like temperature and more like a state of being. My husband, Leo, had been gone for 10 months, and the warmth had been leaving my world ever since. His sickness had been a secret, a quiet thief that stole him first in pieces and then all at once. The medical bills that arrived after his death were the final, brutal act. They took the apartment, the savings, the life we had built. They took everything but this car and the memories that were now so sharp they felt like shards of glass under my skin. I looked at the flyer again. A farmhouse. A home. It was a phantom limb, a feeling I no longer had any right to. But for $7, could I afford not to try? The engine turned over with a pained, grinding cough, a sound that mirrored the one in my own chest. I pulled out of the library parking lot, the tires crunching on the frozen gravel. I was going to an auction, with $7 and the ghost of a hope I didn't even know I had left. It felt like the stupidest, most reckless thing I had ever done. It also felt like the only thing left to do. The courthouse smelled of damp wool coats and old paper. The room for the auction was a small, wood-paneled office on the second floor, a place designed for property tax disputes and minor civic grievances, not for the remaking of a life. I was the youngest person there by at least 30 years. A handful of older men in flannel shirts and worn work boots sat on the folding chairs, their arms crossed, their expressions hovering between boredom and predatory interest. They looked like the kind of men who knew the value of everything and the worth of nothing. I took a seat in the back, my thin jacket pulled tight around me, feeling like a child who had wandered into her father's business meeting. At the front of the room, behind a heavy oak desk, sat a man who looked as weary as the building itself. His nameplate read, Mr. Abernathy, County Clerk. He had a kind face, etched with the fine lines of a man who'd spent a lifetime saying no gently. He peered at the small crowd over his reading glasses, his gaze lingering on me for a moment with a flicker of what might have been curiosity or pity. He cleared his throat, the sound swallowed by the dead air. "All right," he began, his voice raspy. "Let's get the homesteading initiative auction started. You all know the rules. These are as-is properties. The county makes no guarantees as to their condition, habitability, or structural integrity. Buyer assumes all liability. We're just clearing the books." He said it with the rote cadence of a flight attendant demonstrating a life vest. He started going through the list. A lot in town with a collapsed foundation went for $50. A parcel of swampland nobody wanted went for its lien of $12. The men made their bids with a slight nod or a raised finger, a silent language of local commerce I didn't understand. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt foolish, exposed. Then he said it. Lot 27, 1440 Black Creek Road. He didn't even look up from his papers. Old Miller Place, farmhouse, barn, 5 acres. Lien is $7. Do I have a bid for $7? Silence. One of the men in flannel snorted softly. Another shook his head, a barely perceptible motion. My hand, tucked into my pocket, was shaking. The $7 bill felt both as insignificant as a leaf and as heavy as a stone. This was it. This was the moment. The yawning chasm between the life I was living and the life I might live, even if that life was in a ruin at the end of a dirt road. I had to do something. I had to speak. My voice came out as a squeak, a pathetic, airy sound. "I'll bid." Mr. Abernathy's head snapped up. The other men turned to look at me, their faces blank with surprise. For a second, I thought I had broken some unspoken rule. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses, his eyes focusing on me. A bid for $7 from the young lady in the back. He looked around the room. Any other bids? The man who had snorted just smirked, looking away. The others were already losing interest, turning their attention back to their folded hands and worn boots. They knew something I didn't. They knew this place was worthless. They knew it was a trap. But it was my trap. "Going once," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice now softer, aimed directly at me. "Going twice." He paused, and in that pause, I felt the entire weight of the last year, the grief, the debt, the cold nights in the car. This wasn't a choice, it was an anchor. Something to hold on to, even if it was pulling me down. "Sold," he said, his gavel tapping the desk with a quiet, final thud. "To the young lady for $7. I walked to the desk on unsteady legs, my face burning. I unfolded the worn bill and smoothed it out on the polished wood. Mr. Abernathy took it without a word. He filled out a simple deed transfer, his pen scratching across the thick paper. "Clara," he said, looking up at me. His eyes were tired but clear. "I feel I should warn you. The Miller place, it's been empty a long time. People around here say it's haunted by more than just bad memories. It's a wreck." I just nodded. "I know. The roof is gone in places. The foundation is questionable. You'll be lucky if the well is still good. It's no place to spend a winter." "I don't have many other options," I said, the words tasting like metal. He sighed, a long, slow exhale. He pushed the deed across the desk. "The keys are in a lockbox on the front porch. Code is 1958. The year the Millers left." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Good luck, son. I mean that." I took the paper. It felt impossibly heavy in my hand. A deed. To a home. My home. As I walked out, I could feel the eyes of the other men on my back, not with malice, but with a kind of detached, rural pity. They weren't just letting me buy a piece of property. They were letting me buy a mistake. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like a mistake I was choosing to make myself. The drive out to Black Creek Road was a journey from one world to another. I left the small, gridded streets of town with their modest houses and struggling storefronts and headed west. The road unfurled before me, a ribbon of cracked asphalt that grew narrower and more uneven with every mile. The sky was a vast, unforgiving sheet of gray, the color of old pewter. Leafless trees clawed at the edges of the horizon, their branches like black veins against the pale light. After 10 miles, the pavement gave way to gravel. The sound of my tires changed from a hum to a gritty, rhythmic crunch. The car rattled and groaned, protesting the rough terrain. Each bump and shudder felt like a punctuation mark in a long sentence of doubt. What was I doing? I was driving a car that was one bad pothole away from complete failure to a house that was likely in the same condition, in a place where the closest neighbor was miles away. This wasn't a homesteading initiative, it was an act of banishment. I passed a rusted mailbox leaning at a 45-degree angle, its door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Then another, this one peppered with what looked like buckshot holes. The landscape was beautiful, in a stark, lonely way. Rolling fields, fallow and covered in a thin layer of frost, stretched out on either side of the road. Patches of dark, dense pine forest broke up the monotony, their evergreen branches a deep, somber contrast to the pale browns and grays of the dormant land. It was the kind of beauty that didn't care if you were there to see it. It was ancient and indifferent. Leo would have loved it. The thought came unbidden, a sharp pang of grief that was so familiar it almost felt like a part of my own heartbeat. He had always talked about wanting land, a place away from the noise and the rush. A place where you could hear yourself think. Someplace with character, Clara, he'd say. Not just a box in the sky. I clutched the steering wheel, my knuckles white. He had been a man full of quiet dreams he never got to realize, and I was a woman full of quiet memories I couldn't escape. The road curved sharply, and the GPS on my phone, which had been struggling for a signal, finally gave up, the screen freezing on a blank map. I was on my own. Mr. Abernathy's directions had been simple. Follow Black Creek until you think you've gone too far. Then go another mile. The gravel road narrowed further, becoming little more than 2 ruts in the dirt. And then I saw it. Set back from the road, at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, was the house. It stood on a slight rise, silhouetted against the bruised evening sky. Mr. Abernathy had not been exaggerating. It was a skeleton. The farmhouse was a classic 2-story, white clapboard structure, but the paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood bare and weathered to a silver gray. The porch roof sagged dramatically in the middle, held up by what looked like sheer force of will. Most of the windows were boarded up, but a few on the second floor were just dark, empty squares, like vacant eyes. A massive oak tree stood beside it, one of its heavy limbs having crashed down onto the roof of the west wing, punching a hole through to the sky. I pulled the car to a stop at the mouth of the driveway, the engine idling, the heater blowing its weak, lukewarm air. This wasn't a house. It was a monument to decay. It wasn't a second chance. It was a final resting place for hope. I sat there for a long time, the engine humming a mournful tune. I could just turn around, drive back to town, spend my last dollar on gas, and keep going until the car died for good. It was the sensible thing to do. But I looked at the deed lying on the passenger seat. Lot 27. My lot. My mistake. My $7 ruin. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the whole desolate landscape, I put the car in gear and slowly, carefully, began to drive up the driveway. The weeds scraped against the undercarriage of the car, a dry, whispering sound, like the earth telling me I wasn't welcome. I parked the car a safe distance from the house, wary of the sagging porch and the general air of imminent collapse. The air was bitingly cold, sharp and clean in a way city air never is. It smelled of pine and damp earth and snow that was waiting just over the horizon. I zipped up my thin jacket, a useless gesture against the profound chill, and walked toward the front porch. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, and I tested each one before putting my full trust in it. On the wall beside the front door, just as Mr. Abernathy had said, was a small, rusted lockbox. I fumbled with the cold metal dials, my fingers stiff and clumsy. 1958. The dials clicked into place, and with a small pop, the front of the box fell open. Inside, a single, ornate brass key rested on a bed of faded velvet. It was heavy, substantial. A key to a real door. I took it and fit it into the lock. It turned with a surprising smoothness, the mechanism inside groaning but yielding. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on protesting hinges, revealing the darkness within. The air that rolled out was thick and musty, the smell of 100 forgotten seasons. It was the smell of trapped time. I stood on the threshold, peering into the gloom. My phone's flashlight cut a weak, trembling beam through the darkness. The entryway opened into a large central room. A grand stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mouth filled with debris and soot. The floor was covered in a thick carpet of dust, leaves, and plaster that had fallen from the ceiling. In the center of the room, a ghostly shape resolved itself under my light. A long dining table, still surrounded by chairs, all of it draped in the pale shrouds of cobwebs. It looked like the occupants had vanished in the middle of a meal 60 years ago. Every surface was coated in the fine, gray powder of decay. And yet, there was a strange stillness to it, a sense of peace. This place hadn't been vandalized, it had simply been left, forgotten. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the debris. The sound was obscenely loud in the profound silence. I swept my light across the room. To my left was a staircase, its wooden banister miraculously intact. To my right, a doorway led into what must have been the living room. Against the far wall, I could see the outlines of furniture cloaked in white sheets, like sleeping giants. It was a time capsule, a tomb. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. This was impossible. It would take a fortune, a crew of workers, a miracle, to make this place livable. What had I done? My light drifted across the stone mantelpiece above the fireplace. It was thick with dust, but something was sitting there. Something that didn't belong. It was a small, dark wooden box, about the size of a shoebox. Unlike everything else in the room, it was almost free of dust, as if it had been placed there recently. My heart started to beat a little faster. I walked over, my light fixed on it. It was made of a dark, rich wood, maybe cherry or mahogany, and it was beautifully crafted with dovetail joints. There was no lock, just a simple brass latch. With a trembling hand, I reached out and wiped the thin layer of dust from its lid. There, burned into the wood, was a single initial. L. My breath caught in my throat. L for Leo. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence. A cruel, meaningless joke played by the universe. But my hand was already on the latch. I lifted it. The lid opened smoothly. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried lavender, was a single, thick envelope. My name was written on the front in his familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. Clara. And beneath the envelope, a single, small, modern-looking key. Not an old brass one like the door key, but a silver one, the kind that opens a padlock or a lockbox. I sank to my knees on the dusty floor, the flashlight beam dancing wildly on the walls. My mind refused to connect the dots. Leo. Here. How? He had never mentioned this town, this house. He'd grown up an orphan, passed between foster homes in the city. That was the story he'd always told me. That was the story I had believed. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy. My fingers were numb, not just from the cold, but from a shock that went deeper than bone. I tore it open. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written on thick, cream-colored paper. I angled my flashlight onto the first page and began to read. "My dearest Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means several things. It means I am gone. It means the world has taken from you what it was always bound to take. And it means you were brave enough, or perhaps desperate enough, to come here, to come home." The words on the page swam before my eyes, the ink blurring as tears I didn't know I was holding back began to fall. I wiped them away with the back of my dusty glove, desperate to read, to understand. "I am so sorry, my love," the letter continued. "I am sorry for the secrets. I am sorry for the pain my leaving will cause you. I tried to build a fortress around you, to protect you from the truth. But I see now that all I did was build you a prison of ignorance. I hope, with this, I can give you the key." My whole body was shaking. He knew. He knew he was going to die. The doctors had told me his illness had been aggressive, sudden. A lie. It had all been a lie. He had been carrying this weight alone, smiling at me over breakfast, holding my hand as we fell asleep, all while knowing his time was running out. The anger was a hot, bitter wave rising in my throat. How could he? How could he leave me to face the fallout, the debt, the collapse of our life, completely unprepared? "This house," I read on, my flashlight beam trembling. "This was my grandparents' home. The Miller place." My name was not always Leo Vance. I was born Leo Miller. I grew up in this house, on this land. They were good people. They loved this town, and this town, for a time, loved them back. But things changed. A development company came in, promising jobs and prosperity. What they brought was debt and ruin. They used predatory loans and legal loopholes to force families like mine off their land. My grandfather fought them. He lost. We lost everything. My parents died a few years later, broken and poor. I was sent into the foster system, and I took a new name. I wanted to erase the shame, the failure. I wanted to forget Black Creek Road. I sat back on my heels, the cold of the floor seeping through my jeans. Leo, a Miller. The name Mr. Abernathy had said so casually. The people who had left in 1958. No, that couldn't be right. Leo wasn't that old. I read on, my mind racing. The timeline might confuse you. The town records are a mess, deliberately so. The company that took our land covered its tracks well. My family was forced out in 1988, not 1958. The records were forged. It was part of how they operated, creating a paper trail so convoluted no one could follow it. I spent years, Clara, years of my life, secretly untangling it. I found this place again, legally abandoned but morally mine. I used what little money I had to pay off the tax lien through a third party, just enough to keep the county from seizing it outright, but not enough to draw attention. I bought it back for us, a secret I was saving for the right time. A sob escaped my lips, raw and ragged in the echoing silence of the house. He had been planning a future for us here, a future he knew he would never see. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but now it was wrapped in a profound, devastating sadness. He wasn't just my husband, he was a stranger, a man with a history I never knew, a history of pain and loss that mirrored my own in ways I couldn't have imagined. "I know you're angry," the letter said, as if he could hear my thoughts across the veil of death. "You have every right to be, but when I got the diagnosis, when I knew my time was limited, I had a choice. I could spend my last months burdening you with my sickness, watching the fear in your eyes, and leaving you with nothing but debt and sorrow. Or I could use the time I had left to prepare a different path for you. A real inheritance. Not just a house, but a choice. My eyes fell to the small, silver key that had been in the box. That key opens a safe deposit box. It's hidden beneath the floorboards in the master bedroom, the room at the top of the stairs with the view of the creek. Inside, you will find everything you need to understand. But I have to ask you to do one thing for me first. Stay the night. Sleep in this house. Feel its bones. Let it speak to you. Don't make any decisions until the sun comes up. This place has a way of holding you, of making you feel its history. I need you to feel it before you decide what to do next. This is not the end of the story, Clara. It is the beginning of yours. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you more than I had the words to say. I love you still. Yours always, Leo. I let the letter fall into my lap. The flashlight beam pointed at the ceiling, illuminating the cracks and the water stains. The house was no longer just a ruin. It was a testament, a story, a secret history that was now mine. Stay the night. The request was absurd. There was no heat, no water, no light. But it was his last request. I looked around the dark, dusty room. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with his voice, his presence. I wasn't alone in this house. I was with him. I had to stay. I had to see it through. The decision to stay was one thing. The reality of it was another. The sun had set completely, plunging the world outside into a deep, starless black. The cold, which had been a persistent nuisance, now became a genuine threat. It was a physical presence, a weight that settled in my chest and made each breath a little shallower. I went back out to the car, the crunch of my boots on the frozen ground the only sound for miles. I grabbed the emergency blanket I kept in the trunk, a thin silver sheet of mylar that crinkled loudly with every movement. I also took the half-eaten bag of pretzels and the last bottle of water. It was a pathetic excuse for a night's provisions, but it was all I had. Back inside, the darkness felt even more absolute. I decided the living room, with its sheet-draped furniture, was the most defensible position against the cold. I pulled the dusty sheet off a large sofa, sending a cloud of particles into my flashlight beam. The couch itself was surprisingly well preserved, its floral-patterned fabric faded but intact. I lay down, pulling the mylar blanket over me. The crinkling sound was deafening in the silence. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind that moaned through the hole in the roof, sounded like an intruder. I was terrified. But underneath the fear, something else was stirring. I thought about Leo. I pictured him as a boy, running through these rooms, his laughter echoing where now there was only silence. I pictured him as a man, secretly plotting his return, driven by a sense of justice and a love for a past I never knew he had. The anger was still there, a knot of betrayal in my stomach. He had lied to me. For our entire relationship, he had carried this secret. He had let me believe he was an orphan with no roots, when in fact, his roots ran deeper into this soil than I could have imagined. He had watched me mourn the family I'd lost, never once telling me he understood that specific pain. It felt like a fundamental deception, a crack in the very foundation of our love. I closed my eyes, the mylar blanket crackling as I shifted. Why? Why hide it all? Was he ashamed? Was he afraid? The letter said he wanted to protect me. But protect me from what? A piece of his own heart? I sat up, the cold floorboards biting through my jeans. I couldn't rest. His words echoed in my mind. Don't make any decisions until the sun comes up. I needed to understand what he was trying to tell me. I stood up and, with my flashlight as my only guide, I began to explore. I walked from room to room on the first floor. The kitchen was a disaster, cabinets hanging open, a thick layer of grime on every surface. But I could see the ghost of it, a warm, bright room where a family had once gathered. I found the pantry, its shelves still lined with dusty, empty mason jars. In the dining room, I ran my hand along the long, solid wood table. How many family dinners? How many holidays? This house wasn't just a structure, it was a repository of life. I went to the staircase. The wood was solid under my feet. I climbed slowly, the beam of my light dancing ahead of me. The second floor was colder, the wind whistling through the broken windows. There were 3 bedrooms. The first 2 were small, empty except for dust and debris. Then I came to the master bedroom, the one Leo had mentioned. It was at the front of the house, with a large window that, despite being boarded up, I knew must have a commanding view. In the center of the room was the frame of a 4-poster bed, stripped of its mattress and linens, looking like the skeleton of a great beast. This was his parents' room. This was where he wanted me to look. The temptation to find the loose floorboard right then, to get the key and uncover the rest of the secret, was immense. But his instructions had been clear. Wait. I sat on the dusty floor, leaning my back against the wall, and wrapped the mylar blanket around my shoulders. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I cried. I cried for Leo, for the lonely battle he had fought. I cried for the boy he had been, who had lost all of this. I cried for myself, for the woman who had been so blind, so wrapped up in her own smaller griefs that she couldn't see the vast, hidden sorrow in the man she loved. And I cried out of anger, a hot, furious anger at his choice. To leave me alone, to orchestrate this bizarre, posthumous scavenger hunt. It felt both like an act of incredible love and an act of incredible arrogance. The night wore on, an eternity of cold and silence. I must have dozed off, because I was startled awake by a change in the light. A pale, gray dawn was filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The sun was coming up. I was still cold, still exhausted, still heartbroken. But something had shifted in the long, dark hours. The anger had cooled, leaving behind a hard, clear sense of purpose. He had given me a task. He had trusted me with his deepest secret. The least I could do was see it through. If you've ever been at a crossroads like that, where the path forward is terrifying, but the path back is gone, you know the feeling. It's a strange kind of freedom. And if you're finding some of your own story in mine, I'd be honored if you'd hit that like button. It lets me know I'm not just talking into the void. This community is built on sharing these hard moments and knowing we aren't alone in them. The story isn't over, not by a long shot. Now, let's get back to what I found under that floorboard. As the morning light grew stronger, it painted the dust-filled air in stripes of silver and gray. The house seemed to exhale, the deep shadows of the night receding to reveal more detail. The intricate carving on the bed frame, the faded pattern of the wallpaper, the deep, rich grain of the oak floorboards. I got to my feet, my joints stiff and protesting. I looked around the master bedroom, my eyes scanning the floor. Leo's letter had said the loose board was near the window, with a view of the creek. I walked over to the boarded-up window and knelt down. The floorboards were wide planks of solid oak, covered in a century of grime, but otherwise remarkably solid. I started tapping them with my knuckles, listening for a change in the sound. Thud, thud, thud. Then, near the right side of the window, a different sound, a hollow echo. I pushed on the board, and it gave slightly, sinking a fraction of an inch under my weight. My heart leaped. This was it. There was no handle, no obvious way to lift it. I took out the small multi-tool Leo had given me one Christmas. For emergencies, he'd said with a smile, and used the pliers to grip the edge of the plank. It was stuck fast. I pulled, grunting with effort, my muscles straining. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud crack, the nails holding it in place for decades finally surrendered. The board came loose in my hands. I set it aside and peered into the darkness below. There, nestled in the space between the floor joists, was a metal box. It was a standard fireproof safe box, the kind you can buy at any office supply store, secured with a small silver padlock. The lock that matched the key from the wooden box downstairs. My hands were trembling so much I could barely fit the key into the lock. It clicked open. I lifted the lid of the safe box. My breath hitched. The top layer was cash. Stacks of it. $100 bills, neatly wrapped in paper bands. I lifted one out. It was more money than I had seen in my entire life. I quickly counted the stacks. It had to be close to $50,000. Enough to fix my car. Enough to get an apartment. Enough to eat for a year without worrying. Enough to walk away from this ruin and never look back. It was escape velocity in a box. But Leo's letter had said this wasn't just about money. It was about a choice. Beneath the cash, there was more. A thick manila folder, bulging with papers. And under that, a small, black USB flash drive. I set the money aside, my mind reeling. The immediate, desperate pressure of survival had just been lifted, and the feeling was so overwhelming it was dizzying. But the money felt secondary. The real answers, the real inheritance were in that folder. I opened it. The first document on top was a deed. The official, notarized deed to this property, 1440 Black Creek Road, free and clear, in the name of a trust. A trust named the Clara Vance Legacy. My name. He had put the house in my name before he died. He had made sure it was mine, untouchable by the debts that had swallowed the rest of our life. Tears welled in my eyes again, but this time they were different. They weren't just for the loss, but for the sheer, stubborn, secret love of this man. He had been planning, always planning, to save me. Behind the deed were more letters, 3 of them, each one numbered. I pulled out the first one. Clara, it began. If you found the money, I hope you can breathe for the first time in a while. Use it. It's clean. It's yours. But please, before you decide what to do with it, read the rest of this. The money is the start, not the end. I took a deep breath and continued reading. He proceeded to lay out the full story, the one he'd hinted at in the first letter, but in painstaking, devastating detail. He explained how a company called Northwood Development, run by a man named Alistair Finch, had systematically dismantled the farming community in this part of the country. They used a combination of predatory lending, legal intimidation, and political influence to acquire land for pennies on the dollar. He included copies of documents, falsified records, threatening letters sent to his grandfather, articles from the local paper from the 80s that painted Northwood as saviors. My grandfather, Samuel Miller, was a proud man, Leo wrote. He was the last one on this road to hold out. He tried to organize the other farmers to fight back. Finch and his lawyers buried him in lawsuits. They bled him dry. They broke his spirit. The day we left this house, he was a ghost. He died a year later. My father never recovered. The letter was filled with a cold, precise anger. It wasn't the hot rage of a young man. It was the calculated, patient fury of someone who had spent a lifetime honing his pain into a weapon. I spent the last 10 years of my life tracking Northwood's activities. After they destroyed this area, they moved on, repeating the same pattern in other rural communities across the state. They got better at hiding it, using shell corporations and complex financial instruments, but the playbook was the same. I became an expert in their methods, and I found their weakness. My hands were shaking as I read. This was the man I married. The quiet, gentle man who worked in logistics, who loved old movies and bad puns. He had been living a secret life, a vigilante accountant hunting the ghosts of his past. A few years ago, the letter went on, I got a job with a firm that audited one of Northwood's subsidiary companies. It was a long shot, but I got in, and I found it. Clara. The smoking gun. A secret ledger hidden deep in their servers, detailing the bribes, the illegal foreclosures, the whole criminal enterprise going back decades. I copied everything. The flash drive in this box contains it all. I looked at the small black USB drive. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I filed a whistleblower lawsuit under a pseudonym. The money in this box is the first payment from the settlement.
I settled out of court, quietly, because I didn't want the attention. My goal was never to get rich. It was to get justice, and to get this house back. The settlement required them to sign the deed over to my trust. It was my one non-negotiable term. I made them give me back my home. I leaned my head against the rough wall, the scale of his secret life crashing down on me. He hadn't just been sick. He had been at war, and he had won. But the story, I knew, wasn't over. There were still 2 letters left in the folder. I picked up the second letter, my mind still struggling to process the enormity of what I had just learned. Leo, my quiet, unassuming Leo, had been a warrior. He had avenged his family, reclaimed his home, and provided for me in a way I could never have imagined. What more could there be? Clara, this letter began, the money and the house are yours, no matter what. That is your shield. I built it so you would be safe. But the evidence on that flash drive, that is a sword. And what you do with it is the most important choice of all. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I had a feeling I knew where this was going. Northwood Development isn't gone. Alistair Finch is an old man now, but his son, Julian, runs the company. And they're back. I found out a few months before I died that they have a new project planned. It's called Black Creek Estates. They plan to buy up all the land surrounding this farm, hundreds of acres of it, to build a luxury golf resort and gated community for the wealthy. They're promising the county jobs and a new tax base, the same lies they told my grandfather's generation. The name Black Creek Estates rang a faint bell. I'd seen a sign for it on the drive into town, a glossy professional sign showing smiling, affluent people golfing and drinking wine. It had seemed so out of place, so disconnected from the struggling reality of the area. Now I understood. It was the next wave of the same old storm. The town is divided, Leo wrote. Some people are desperate enough to believe the promises. Others remember what happened last time, but they're scared. Finch has the local council in his pocket. The project is all but approved. It will destroy what's left of this community, drive out the few remaining family farms, and turn this whole area into a playground for the rich. It will be the final insult to my family's memory. I could feel his anger burning through the page, a righteous fire that had fueled him for years. He hadn't just wanted personal vengeance, he wanted to save this place. He wanted to stop the cycle. The evidence on that flash drive is enough to stop them. It's not just about their past crimes. It proves a pattern of racketeering that continues to this day. If it were made public, it would trigger a federal investigation. It would destroy Northwood Development for good. It would give this town a chance to breathe, to decide its own future. It would give the people Finch is trying to push out the leverage they need to fight back. I looked at the USB drive again. It was so small, so innocuous. It was a bomb. Which brings me to your choice, my love. This is the real inheritance. I turned the page, my hand trembling. This was it, the final letter, the purpose of this whole elaborate, heartbreaking plan. Choice 1. You take the money and this house. You sell the land to Northwood. They'll pay you a fortune for it, enough to make you wealthy for life. You take the flash drive and you throw it in the deepest part of Lake Michigan. You disappear. You start a new life, somewhere warm and beautiful. You will be safe, and you will be free from all of this. You will have deserved it. I will not blame you. I would understand. I paused, my mind reeling at the thought.
A new life. No more cold nights in the car. No more fear, no more struggle.
The offer was seductive, a siren song of ease and comfort. I could leave this ruin, this town, this painful history behind me forever. It was everything I had been dreaming of for months. Just walk away. Choice 2, the letter continued, and I just knew, this was the heart of it all. You stay. You use the money not to escape, but to rebuild. You fix this house, not to sell it, but to live in it. You make it a home again. And you use the evidence on that drive. You leak it. You fight them. It will be a war, Clara. The Finches are powerful and ruthless. They will come after you. They will threaten you. They will try to ruin you. It will be hard, and it will be dangerous. You will be trading a safe, easy life for a difficult, meaningful one. He had laid it all out. The two paths, branching before me, stark and clear. The easier wrong versus the harder right. I cannot make this choice for you, he wrote. To force you into my fight would be the ultimate cruelty. It has to be yours. All I wanted was to give you the option. The one thing my family never had. A choice. This house, this land, it isn't just property. It's a legacy. It's a story of resilience. What happens next is up to you. You can be the final chapter, or you can be the first chapter of a new book. Whatever you decide, I will be proud of you. All my love, forever, Leo. I lowered the letters, my vision blurred. The $50,000 on the floor seemed insignificant now. The real value of what he'd left me was this choice. He hadn't just given me a house, he had given me a purpose, if I was brave enough to claim it. He had given me a chance to stop being a victim of circumstance and to become an agent of change. He had trusted me. He had trusted me to understand, to see the bigger picture. He had known me better than I knew myself. He knew that for me, a life without meaning, no matter how comfortable, would be its own kind of prison. I looked out the boarded window, at the slivers of gray light. I thought of the tired faces in the town, of Mr. Abernathy's gentle warning. I thought of the land, stark and beautiful and indifferent, waiting. Leo didn't abandon me. He anchored me. He didn't leave me with nothing. He left me with everything. A home to build, a history to honor, and a war to win. And in that cold, dusty room, surrounded by the ghosts of his past, I knew what I had to do. I was going to stay. I was going to fight. The decision settled over me, not like a weight, but like a shield. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my gut, but it was no longer in control. It was accompanied by a fierce, unfamiliar clarity. For the first time since Leo's death, I knew exactly what I was supposed to do next. My first act as the new lady of the house was practical. I went back to my car and retrieved the tire iron from the trunk. Then, with a grunt of effort and a screech of protesting nails, I began prying the boards off the windows in the master bedroom. It was hard physical work. My muscles, weak from months of inactivity and poor nutrition, screamed in protest. But with each board that came crashing down, more light flooded the room. It felt symbolic. I was letting the light in, literally and figuratively. When the last board was gone, I stood before the large, grime-covered window and looked out. The view was breathtaking. The land sloped gently down to a winding creek, its water dark and clear. Beyond it, a forest of pine and birch stood sentinel, their branches dusted with the morning's frost. It was a view of quiet, enduring beauty. This was what Leo's grandfather had fought for. This was what Northwood Development wanted to pave over for a golf course. Not on my watch. My next move was to find a lawyer. I knew I couldn't just walk into a newspaper office with a flash drive and a wild story. The Finches were powerful. I needed protection. I needed a strategy. I used my phone, which was now miraculously getting a single bar of service, to look up lawyers in the nearest city, 2 hours away. I ignored the big, glossy firms with their corporate logos. I looked for someone small, independent, someone who specialized in environmental law or public interest cases. I found a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Her website was simple, her bio direct. She had a history of taking on big corporations on behalf of small communities. She looked like a fighter. I called her office. The receptionist was skeptical, but I was firm. "Tell her I have documented proof of decades of racketeering by Northwood Development," I said, the words feeling powerful on my tongue. "And tell her I have the means to pay her retainer." That got her attention. I had an appointment for the following afternoon. With the first steps of the battle plan in place, I turned my attention to the house. It was overwhelming, a mountain of decay. But a mountain is just a lot of stones. You move them one at a time. I started with the master bedroom. I found a broom in a downstairs closet, its bristles stiff and matted, and I began to sweep. I swept away the dust, the plaster, the dead leaves. I swept away the cobwebs of 60 years of neglect. It was a simple, mindless task, but it was deeply satisfying. With every push of the broom, I was claiming the space. I was transforming it from a tomb into a room. I worked for hours, fueled by pretzels and a growing sense of ownership. By late afternoon, the room was transformed. It was still empty, the walls were still stained, but it was clean. The floorboards, cleared of their dusty shroud, glowed with a warm, honey-colored light. I went back to the car and brought in my meager possessions, my duffel bag of clothes, my sleeping bag, the box of Leo's letters. I unrolled my sleeping bag in the center of the clean floor. That night, I wouldn't be sleeping on a dusty couch as a trespasser. I would be sleeping in my own room, in my own house. Before I settled in for the night, I did one more thing. I walked down to the creek. The air was cold and still. I stood on the bank and held the small USB drive in my palm. It was the sword Leo had left me. It held so much power, so much potential for destruction and for justice. I thought about his other option. Throw it in the lake, walk away, be safe. A part of me, the tired, scared part, still yearned for that path. But I knew I couldn't take it. To do so would be to betray Leo's memory, his fight, and the trust he had placed in me. It would be to betray the person he believed I could be. That evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted fields, the house didn't feel like a ruin. It felt like a promise. It was a promise I had made to a ghost, and a promise I was making to myself. The work was just beginning. The fight was just beginning. But for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt like I was home. The next day, I drove into the city to meet Sarah Jenkins. Her office was in a renovated warehouse, all exposed brick and steel beams. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of impatient intelligence. She listened to my story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, I pushed the flash drive across the table to her. She picked it up, looking at it as if it were a live grenade. "If what you're saying is true, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice even, "this changes everything for Emmett County." She explained the legal realities. The evidence, if it was as comprehensive as I claimed, could trigger a RICO case. It would be a long, brutal fight. Northwood would use every trick in the book. "They will try to discredit you," she warned. "They will dig into your life, your husband's life. They will paint you as a disgruntled, unstable woman looking for a payday." Are you prepared for that? I thought of the cold nights in my car. I thought of the condescending pity in the eyes of the men at the auction. I thought of Leo, fighting his battle in secret. "I'm prepared," I said, my voice steady. She nodded, a slow, appraising look in her eyes. "Good, because they need to be stopped." We spent the next 2 weeks planning. Sarah and her team analyzed the contents of the drive,
confirming that it was exactly the bombshell Leo had promised. They devised a strategy. First, leak a portion of the evidence to a trusted national journalist to bring public pressure, then file a federal lawsuit and a formal injunction against the Black Creek Estates project. While Sarah prepared the legal assault, I focused on the home front. I used a portion of the money to buy a used, reliable pickup truck and a load of basic supplies: a generator, work lights, tools, a portable heater. The first time I fired up the generator and a string of lights flickered to life in the dark kitchen, I almost cried. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Word of my presence started to spread through the sparse local community. One day, a grizzled old farmer in a John Deere hat pulled up my driveway. His name was Hank, and his farm was the next one down the road, one of the few that had survived the first Northwood invasion. "Heard someone was fixing up the old Miller place," he said, his eyes squinting at the new boards I was using to patch a hole in the porch. "Thought it was the damn developers." "No," I said, "it's just me." He looked me up and down, then at the house. "Samuel Miller was a good man," he said gruffly. "Stubborn as a mule. Glad to see someone's finally showing this place some respect." He didn't offer to help, not directly. But the next morning, there was a stack of seasoned firewood on my porch. A few days later, a woman from the church in town left a box of homemade preserves and a loaf of bread. They were small gestures, cautious offerings of support from a community that had learned to be wary of outsiders. They were watching me, testing me. They were waiting to see if I was just another promise that would be broken. The fight wasn't just in the courtroom. It was here, on this land. It was in every nail I hammered, every window I cleaned. It was in proving that I was one of them, that I was here to stay. The day the story broke was a day of quiet thunder. Sarah had given the exclusive to a reporter from a major national newspaper, known for its investigative journalism. The article went online at 6 a.m. It was a methodical, damning exposé, laying out Northwood's decades-long history of predatory practices, all backed by the documents from Leo's flash drive. It detailed the falsified records, the shell companies, the intimidation tactics. It named Alistair and Julian Finch. It was everything Leo had worked for, brought into the light. I was in the kitchen, drinking coffee heated on the camp stove, when my phone started buzzing. It was Sarah. "It's live," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and tension. "The storm is about to hit." And it did. By noon, my quiet dirt road was no longer quiet. News vans with satellite dishes on their roofs were parked at the end of my driveway, held back by a no trespassing sign Hank had helped me put up. My phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, producers, and numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. This wasn't my story to tell, it was Leo's. The evidence spoke for itself. The reaction from Northwood was swift and predictable. Their lawyers issued a statement calling the allegations baseless and defamatory, and Julian Finch went on television to portray himself as the victim of a malicious smear campaign. He painted me as a greedy opportunist, manipulating my husband's tragic death for financial gain. He was smooth, polished, and utterly believable. For a moment, watching him on my phone's small screen, a sliver of doubt crept in. He was so powerful, so confident. I was just one person in a half-restored farmhouse. But then I looked around at the work I had done. I looked at the clean floors and the light streaming through the new window panes. I had the truth on my side. And I had Leo's legacy. The real turning point came from the community. The day after the story broke, a town hall meeting was called to discuss the Black Creek Estates project. The high school gymnasium was packed. Julian Finch was there, flanked by his lawyers, ready to deliver his usual speech about jobs and progress. But this time, the mood was different. People weren't just scared and hopeful anymore, they were angry. One by one, older residents started to stand up and speak. An elderly woman, her voice trembling but firm,
talked about how her father had lost his farm to Northwood in the 80s. A man spoke of the mysterious fires that had plagued farmers who refused to sell. They were stories that had been whispered for years, dismissed as rumors or sour grapes. But now, in the light of the evidence I had provided, they were being heard as truth. Hank was there. He stood up, his tall frame commanding attention. "I knew Samuel Miller," he said, his voice booming through the gym. "He told us what was happening. He tried to warn us. We didn't listen then, but we're listening now." He turned to Julian Finch. "We don't want your golf course. We don't want your gated community. We want our town back." The gym erupted in applause. Finch's composure finally cracked. His face, usually so smooth and controlled, was a mask of fury. The tide had turned. The legal battle raged on for months. Northwood filed lawsuits against me, against the newspaper. But the federal investigation had been launched, and more whistleblowers, emboldened by the story, began to come forward. The company was bleeding money and credibility. My life during this time was a strange mix of quiet labor and distant warfare. Most days, I worked on the house. I learned to plaster walls, to install insulation, to glaze windows. Hank became a regular presence, showing up with his tractor to help clear a field or offering gruff advice on plumbing. His wife, Mary, started bringing me hot meals, refusing to let me subsist on pretzels and coffee. Other locals, seeing that I was serious, started to help. A retired electrician offered to rewire the house for the cost of materials. A young couple who ran an organic farm nearby helped me plan a garden. The house was slowly, painstakingly, coming back to life. It wasn't just my project anymore. It was becoming the town's. It was a symbol of their own resilience, a testament to the fact that some things, if you fight for them, can be reclaimed. I used the rest of Leo's money, not on fancy furniture or expensive finishes, but on the bones of the house, a new roof, a modern well pump, a septic system. I wanted it to last another 100 years. One cold autumn evening, I was sitting on the newly finished porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah called. "It's over," she said. "They're settling." Northwood Development, facing overwhelming legal pressure and public disgrace, had agreed to scrap the Black Creek Estates project entirely. They were selling off their land holdings in the county, and as part of the settlement, they were funding a community land trust to protect the area from future predatory development. The Finches were ruined. Justice, slow and grinding, had finally been served. After I hung up, I didn't feel a triumphant surge of victory. I just felt a quiet sense of peace. I walked through the house. My house. The rooms were still mostly empty, but they were filled with light and warmth from the new wood stove. It smelled of fresh paint and sawdust and hope. I went upstairs to the master bedroom and looked out the window at the creek. I thought about the choice Leo had given me, the easy life I had turned down. This life, the one I had chosen, had been hard. It had been lonely and scary. But it was real. It was a life of purpose, a life connected to a place and its people. The money Leo left wasn't the treasure. The house wasn't even the treasure. The treasure was the choice he had given me, the faith he had placed in me. He had known that a home isn't just a place you own. It's a place you build, a place you fight for. It's a story you choose to be a part of. What he found wasn't just about making me rich in dollars. It was about making me rich in purpose. My story had a resolution, but I know for so many of you, the fight is still ongoing. Maybe you're at the beginning of your own journey, standing in front of your own version of a ruined farmhouse, wondering if you have the strength to rebuild. I want you to know that you do. The first step is the hardest, but you are not alone. This community we've built here is proof of that. If this story has meant something to you, if it gave you a little bit of hope, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment below. Tell me about a time you chose the harder right over the easier wrong. I read every single one because your stories matter.
They are a part of this larger story we are all writing together. Thank you for listening.